Hey everybody, welcome back to Alan Wall's Photography. I am Alan. I hope I don't seem distant today. By request, we are going to walk through my entire post-processing workflow from Lightroom to Zerene, back to Lightroom and into Photoshop, and I'll show you how I edit my photographs. Stacking and editing focus stacked images is every bit as much an art as taking the pictures in the first place. It can be very complicated and it can be very intimidating for people who are just getting started. So I thought the best way to introduce you to this, if you're not familiar either with the whole concept or specifically if you're not familiar with Zerene Stacker, I want to show you why that is my preferred software by showing you how I do an edit. Of course, I don't have any relationship with Zerene Stacker, though I must say that the owner and the writer of the software, Mr. Rick Littlefield, is one of the nicest chaps I've ever encountered in the business world, and is one of the reasons I use his product. But other than that, there's no financial entanglement. I'm going to rave about this program because I love this program and I use it every day. Which is not saying anything bad about the other programs. I haven't used most of them in quite a long time. Okay, before we get started, one short announcement and then one brief story. The announcement is that just about everybody who commented on my last video, which I believe was yesterday, has been very positive and offered several suggestions about doing the live chat thing. I've been given a lot of pointers as to where to go to find the platform. So I'm going to be doing the rest of my homework on that today, and we'll make a proper announcement about when that thing is going to be as soon as I get all that done. So that won't be long from now. The story is, I don't know if this is entertaining or just disturbing. It's a cautionary tale. It probably won't affect anybody who has a wife or a husband or a child, or probably even a pet would prevent you from doing this. But this is where I prepare my food. This is my cooking area. And this is my insect preparation area. This is where I pickle and then wash and comb and blow dry my bugs for photography. I was preparing some insects to photograph for this video last night, and about halfway through I realized that if I didn't get my carnitas cooking, that I wouldn't be able to eat it, because you can't eat carnitas raw. I guess it's not carnitas if it's raw. Anyway, I digress. So I paused long enough to get the dinner made and get it all in the oven. And then when I went back to the insect area, which is actually the same area that I do my cooking in, I couldn't find a praying mantis. It's a big praying mantis, and I think it might be in the carnitas. So that's disturbing. I'm not throwing the stuff away. The trouble is, after you cook it for a long, long time, most of the bits that aren't pork just kind of dissolve. And I imagine a 3-year-old praying mantis, 3 years old in alcohol, is probably not going to hold together very well. Well, we'll just have to see. If this is my last video, you'll have a good idea why. Shall we begin? I think that's probably a good idea. All right. I usually shoot tethered whenever I can, meaning I have my whole macro photography system set up so that my computer is hardwired to the camera. so that as the photographs are being captured, they are being downloaded directly into the computer. And because Lightroom and Zerene Stacker play very well together, it also puts my photographs into Zerene Stacker. But that's a little bit complicated to set up. I had a few problems early on setting up that system. Zerene is, I think, made for Windows. I mean, it works 100% fine with Mac, but I think there was some problems with the way I was interpreting the instructions, and I don't want to confuse the matter by getting into that. We can do that another time. So I'm going to assume that your workflow begins when you take a series of focus stacked images, whether you're doing it manually or you're using a rail, and you end up with a memory card with 50 or 100 or 300 photographs from several of your subjects in an afternoon shooting. We're going to start there with the memory card, and we're going to take it all the way through to the final images. So the first step in processing my images, and I have two stacks here that I shot this morning. One is of the head of a crane fly. That's daddy long legs for you non-entomologists. And I don't know if you recall the beetle that we photographed when we were doing the lighting cage series of videos. We photographed a little golden beetle. Well, I did some close-up stuff on him today with a microscope objective just to get a close look at his eye and his mouth parts. So they're the two stacks that I have. Now, what I've done in Lightroom, if you're a Lightroom user, because I don't intend to keep these stacks, one of these I think is 100 or more photographs and the other is 50. I don't want all of those partially focused images in my library. So what I do is I import to a special folder that I have set up on Lightroom, and I call it temporary macro stacks. Temporary macro stacks is a holding area. I've named it separately so that I know at the end of an editing session to go back and remove all of the individual images, with the rare exception of one where I didn't like the way the stack came out and I thought I could have done it better. Then I'll hang on to them until I've given it another try, tried some other settings. But generally speaking, when I'm happy with the output, I get rid of the other files. So that's why I keep them in a separate folder. So that is exactly what I've done. I've downloaded all of these pictures into this one file, and you'll see that, yeah, it's an enormous number of pictures. When I first started doing macro photography and got my first version of Photoshop, what I would do, I usually was shooting stacks of 3 or 5 or 10 images at the most, and I would select the images. Let's just say I shot these first 3 images here. I would send them over to Photoshop and stack them there, and the workflow for that is very simple. I will show it to you in case you don't have access to a stacking program. And we're just going to use these 3 pictures as examples. So what I'll do is select the images in my stack, all of them, and then I will go to Edit In and then Open as Layers in Photoshop, just like we do with a lot of our compositing stuff. I don't use Photoshop anymore for focus stacking because for some reason my computer cannot handle the workload. It will bog down and sometimes freeze up completely trying to focus stack in Photoshop. I also, frankly, don't like the outputs. The program makes a lot of guesses about what pixels should be where, and you can end up with some really messy photographs that take a tremendous amount of work to fix. But if it's the only thing you've got, it's better than nothing. So I've got all 3 photographs here. I would select all 3 of them by shift clicking on the last one, and with all 3 selected, I would go to Edit, Auto Align Layers. Now, when you do that, it'll give you several options. Just leave it on Auto and hit OK. Then for only 3 images, it would only be a second. I'm not going to do that because I need these images completely unchanged when I send them over into Zerene. So we'll pretend I did that. Now, once that process is finished, all 3 of these images will have been aligned by Photoshop. Then, with all 3 of them still highlighted, go to Edit, Auto Blend Layers, the instruction right below the alignment. And in this case, click on the second option, Stack Images. Leave Seamless Tones and Colors checked, and Content Aware Fill Transparent Areas. That's where a lot of the trouble comes from, but it's best to leave that checked. And then click OK, and it'll do it for you. And it will spit out one image at the top of the stack that has been knitted together from all the images that you took. If you haven't tried it, give it a try. There's absolutely no harm in it. That is all we're going to talk about Photoshop for now. First thing, when you're importing your images, make sure that if you took a few test shots, as I almost always do at the beginning of your stack before you started taking the actual images, you need to get rid of those. If you somehow let those images into your stack, it will mess things up. Because oftentimes I'll do test shots before I even get my diffuser tube in place, just to make sure I've got the lighting the way I want it. And oftentimes my specimen will move somewhere during the test shot process. And if that's the case, that can cause serious problems later on. So be very, very careful to go through your stack and make sure that any shots where the flash didn't fire at the right setting, or there was movement, you get rid of those. So get rid of all your test shots. Now, there are a few things that I'll do in Lightroom before we go over. I will select on all of them, the whole stack, go to Develop. Now, this is an interesting case here, because you can see in this photograph only one spine on one antenna is in focus. This was the first shot that I took, and that's the way it's supposed to be. Normally what I'll do, I'll select all of the photographs and then go to one that has enough focus around the middle of the image that I can see the effects that I'm having. All the images are selected. I just have the one I'm looking at is from the center of the stack. And I'll make some minor adjustments in Lightroom. Sometimes I'll nudge the white balance one way or the other, depending on the insect and the look I'm going for. In this case, I want to move it ever so slightly into the colder range. My exposure is fine. The shot is perfectly exposed. But what I would like to do is drop the highlights a little, actually quite a lot, and boost the shadows. I will set my white point and my black point the way we've talked about before. That's looking fine. I won't touch anything else, with the possible exception of adding a little dehaze. I'm not sure exactly what good that does, but it does seem to decrease areas of confusion in the stack a little bit. The only other thing that I'll do is remove chromatic aberration. Sharpening, Lightroom already sharpens to a value of 40. I don't see any reason to add any sharpening. Wow, that eye is impressive. Okay, good. I'm excited about this stack. So all I have really done is some basic adjustments. I'm happy with the way the histogram looks. Now we're ready to take all of these photographs into Zerene. Now, Zerene Stacker won't work with raw photographs. It needs to work with either JPEGs or TIFFs, T-I-F-F. I far prefer using TIFFs. They're 16-bit, much more information in those images. So by using the plugin, all I have to do is right-click on the selected images, which is all of them, and go to Export to Zerene Stacker. And what Zerene will do, or what Lightroom will do, is convert every one of these 100 photographs into a TIFF file and move those over to Zerene Stacker. So while we're waiting for Lightroom to send those pictures into Zerene, there's one thing about the interface between the two programs that is worth pointing out. Now, there may be a workaround to this that I'm not familiar with, so I would defer to a Zerene expert on that. But when you send a photograph to edit from Lightroom to Photoshop and then you save it in Photoshop, it will automatically take that photograph back to Lightroom and put it in the folder that it came from, which is fantastic. It's a great way to keep track of your images as you're editing them. Zerene doesn't do that. It outputs an image, and I'll show you what that looks like when we get to that point. But it does not automatically put it in Lightroom. It will save it into my Lightroom photographs folder. But one thing you'll learn if you're moving photographs around and you have Lightroom is that you must never move a photograph outside of the Lightroom program, because Lightroom will not be able to find it. Lightroom indexes your photographs and retrieves them that way. So when Zerene outputs a final image, it will go into a Lightroom folder, but it will not show up in Lightroom. So at the end of the process, we're going to have to re-import the final image, and I'll show you how that goes, because we're actually not just sending these images to Zerene, we're actually exporting them from Lightroom into Zerene. So when Zerene Stacker opens up, this is what you will see. You'll see the first TIFF file from the top of your stack displayed either on the left or above. You can reorient the images side to side or top to bottom. I prefer side to side. So this is what we will see. And all of the images, wow, it is a deep stack. No wonder that took so long. All of them have been organized into Zerene Stacker in the order that they were taken. Now, the first thing we do is stack the images. Now, you go to Stack, and you'll immediately see that there are several options for how you stack them. And while they're stacking, I'm going to explain what each of these options mean. But for now, I recommend select Align and Stack All, both. So there are two separate algorithms that Zerene uses to stack images. The first one is called Pmax. Pmax is unbeatable when it comes to preserving detail, fine detail. The other algorithm, the DMAP, stands for depth map, and it is an excellent algorithm for preserving color and texture. So the real strength, or one of the many strengths of this program, is that you can elect to run both algorithms separately. And that's what I did by clicking the both button when I started the stack. So what is going to happen is Zerene is going to run through the Pmax algorithm, the detail algorithm, if you will, and it will give me an output image called the Pmax output. And that will be the final stacked image using that algorithm. Then it will pause for a few microseconds and it will restack the images from start to finish, just the way it did before in the DMAP, the depth map algorithm. And then we'll get a second output image, one that almost always has better color and better textures, but has not done as well with fine detail. Now, the truth is, I have a hard time predicting which is going to work for any given stack. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I have run thousands of stacks, and I'll think at the beginning that, oh, this will definitely look better in DMAP, and been wrong as often as I've been right, which is why I recommend that even if you've been doing this forever, that you run both algorithms, because once both of the algorithms have been run, we can use components from each of the output images to create a third output image with all of the texture, all of the color, and all of the detail which were spread between the two images. This will make a lot more sense when we start retouching. This is a big stack. 100+ image stacks take a while, but the output is well worth it. So just chat amongst yourselves. I'm going to go make a cup of tea. So here we are at the very end of the Pmax stacking process, and now we have an output image. So this is the output image. It showed there briefly for a moment, but now it's automatically started the second process, which is the depth map algorithm. This one generally goes a little bit faster, but there's an important step that you have to take care of after the images have been preliminarily stacked. I'll let it do its thing, and I'll come back when this stack is almost finished, and I'll show you what that extra step is. When you ask a computer to augment detail, it will sometimes augment artifact as well. And you can already see that this output image has a lot of artifact around it. So there is a step that Rick has built into this program that allows us to tell the program where the real detail is and what can be ignored. And this is that step now. We're asked to set the contrast threshold. Now what that means is any area that is covered by black, we're telling the program, don't worry about that area. There's nothing in there that we want you to sharpen. There's nothing in there that we want in our output image. And it will just, it'll just leave that area blurred, and it will focus all of its computing power on the bits that are not black. So there is no specific setting for this. It's different for every image and every stack. So what I generally do is I see how far I can take it in each direction. You see, if I have the threshold set here, it's going to preserve a lot of this artifact and halos that are showing up. We definitely don't want that. But if I move it too far in the other direction, it's not gonna preserve the detail in the areas that are covered by black, which is bothersome. So what we need to do is find the sweet spot. And like I say, every image, every stack, that sweet spot is going to be different. I'm willing to accept a little bit of black in the structures, so long as they're in places that don't seem particularly important. But what I do want to do is get as much of the artifact out of the fine details. Of course, the the PMax image is gonna help us here. But that, I think 73 looks fine. Well, 71 looks better. Let's go with that. Then you click OK, and the program will now take each of those in focus slices and stack them from back to front. And you'll see the output image emerge from this field of black as the process proceeds. The most important part of the process, and the main reason that I think Zerene is superior to other stacking programs, is what happens after this. Because we have a tool in Zerene that allows us to retouch our photographs using components not only from the two output images, but components from the individual images in the stack. And I'll show you how that works as soon as we get done. I'm not going to make you sit through this process because it'll take a little while. So we're back at the last couple of images that are getting added to the depth map stack. And then we'll have two output images that we can compare. All right. This is our D map. This is the output image that normally gives you better texture and better color, where it can have some problems with detail. So I am blown away by the detail in that eye, and I love I love the colors. This area is stunning. So what I generally do is I'll look around and I'll look for the problem areas. We do have some chromatic aberration going on. It's hardly surprising. This was our $20 microscope objective. You can see quite a lot of it. That's okay. That's okay. This is all stuff we're going to work on. I'm pretty happy with the detail. Certainly the color and the texture is superb, especially down here. Now, when you see pieces of dust or dirt or other minor blemishes, don't worry about them. We have another trip over to Photoshop coming up. So there are a couple of problems in this image. These worm trails are actually focus stacked spots of dust. As the images are stitched together, if you have a piece of dust, it's moving slightly as the perspective of the camera changes, and that causes it to be repeated over and over again and to create these things called worm trails. They're very common. There's a lot of artifact out here at the edges, and some of that might not be salvageable. I may end up cropping some of that out. And let's see. Yeah, same at the other end. By the way, this guy is upside down. This is his forehead. This is his neck. Because it looks like an alien with two arms sticking out and two legs, which is hysterical, but that's actually not what it is. This is his forehead. These are his eyes. This would be his nose if he had one. These are his antennas. And this is his proboscis, which also has two pedipalps or something on the end of them. Anyhow, I'm digressing. So let's look at the PMax image and see how it compares. Interestingly, there is more detail in the DMAP image than there is in the PMax image, which is normally not the case. But that's what I mean about every time you do a stack, it'll be different. Let's see what these really bad areas look like. That's PMax. Yeah, way better in depth map. So what we're going to do our retouching, we need to set an output image. That is, we're gonna place an image in this window that is our retouched image. So we have to start with the image we like the best, that's going to need the fewest changes. In this case, I like the depth map better. So we'll set this as our output image, and then we will go to set it as the output image. You just have to highlight either the PMax or the DMAP in the output images. We have DMAP highlighted, so that's the image you're seeing. Then you go to Edit, Start Retouching. And this is where the magic happens. So this is our output DMAP image, the basis for our retouching. Now what we need to do is select an image that we are going to edit it with. Usually what I will do is I will start with whichever image I'm not editing. I will select the other one as my reference. So now we have the PMax here and the DMAP here. Now you can much more clearly see in this image that the color and the texture is better preserved in the DMAP, as we would expect. But normally, like I say, I would expect these fine hairs to be better preserved in, well, there is actually one area that I can show you where this will show you what this retouching program can do. See this area where you have hairs crossing hairs in the image on the right? This is the kind of artifact that DMAP will often reveal. But if you look at it on the left image, on the PMax image, hardly any of that artifact is there. So what I will do, first of all, let me make my brush a lot smaller. All I have to do is paint over. There's a lot of lag here. That's because I'm trying to record this screen. But if I click and paint over here, it will take the corresponding piece from the photograph on the left and it will replace that on the right. So I have moved the good detail from the left image, and I have basically clone stamped it on top of the same area on the other side. So what you're looking for is areas on your output image where you have something from the other image that looks better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the photograph and look for other areas that have the same issues. And you'll often see problems where bristles cross bristles. Here's another area that looks bad on this side, but good on the PMax side. I'm not going to be able to finish this while I'm recording the screen. The lag is just atrocious. So I'll do that and come back. Okay, so I have gone all the way around the output image, and wherever I could find parts of the image on the left that were preferable to what I was seeing on the right, I would just paint in the elements from the left image onto the right image. Now, what you can also do is go back to your primary image. That this is the images before they were stacked. And if you go through these images looking at the areas that are in focus, for example, this bristle looks great in the original photograph. It's all covered in artifact on this photograph, but all I have to do now, as this is selected as my input, is paint over this. If I can get the cursor to go where I'm telling it to. There we go. So there's still a bit of artifact there, but it's definitely better. And depending on how much time you're prepared to spend, you can go through every single individual image and compare it to every single layer that was used and select only the parts that are perfectly sharp. I think what I will do is, seeing as this is close to impossible to do while I'm recording the screen apparently, I'm going to do a little bit more work. I'm going to go back through the entire stack and see if I can correct any of the areas that are looking pretty bad. So I'll do that and I'll be right back. When I'm finally satisfied that I have repaired everything that I can repair and copied the best bits from my source photos on the left onto my output image on the right, and there's nothing else I can do, I'll go to Edit, Commit Retouching, and what that will do is create a third output image. This is the retouched image. Now, there's no reason for me to keep the original PMax output or the DMAP or any of these files for that matter. So what I will do is I will go to File, Save Output Image. And there's only one image selected from the output images. If there were more than one selected, it would save all of them. But I just want to save that one. It'll ask me whether I want to save it, how I want to save it, and I recommend always saving it as a 16-bit RGB with no compression, because we're taking this from here over into Photoshop. So save image, and then it'll ask you where you want to save it. And this is the thing that's a bit tricky if you're not familiar with Lightroom. It's going to take the retouched image and save it as a TIFF file into the temporary macro stacks. Well, that was the file we started from. True, it was, but we can't export it back into Lightroom in one step. So what we actually have to do is we'll send it to this temporary macro stack, hit save, and if we now go back to Lightroom, you'll just have to take my word for it, but you can go through every one of these images and nowhere in here will be the output image we just saved. It's because it's in a Lightroom folder, but it is not yet in Lightroom. So the way you get around that is go to Library and then Import, because we're going to import that output back into Lightroom. So to do that, I have that file on one of my external drives under Lightroom Images. Now if I go to Temporary Macro Stacks, there it is. This is the output image that I just saved. It's not yet in Lightroom. So I highlight it and make sure that I'm importing it to temporary macro stacks and hit import. And it will now bring it back into my Lightroom filing system so I know where it is. Now, this is the stacked image, but it is by no means finished. There's a lot of stuff I want to do to this. I'm going to have to crop some of this glary part out that I couldn't repair because the source files were also glary. So what I'll do is I'll take this file and I'll right click on it and I'll go to Edit, Edit in Photoshop. Here we are in Photoshop. So all of the distracting bits and the stuff I really don't want to see is this is where we can get rid of that using all the usual tools. I'll usually start by making a copy of the background layer by hitting Command J, and then I'll work on that layer one. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is get rid of dust, worm trails, and so on. And I'll use the content of where, well, it's actually the healing brush tool. You can do this several ways. You can do it with the clone stamp tool, but I find this just a very quick, easy way to get most of the obvious stuff done, including blobs of artifact. So I will carefully, I didn't like that at all. I'd have to zoom in to show it to you. I'm going to undo that. You'll see they look like collapsed compound eye cells. I think I'm probably going to use the clone tool. So I hit S for the clone stamp tool. I'm going to make my stamp the size of one of these lenses. Click Alt to select the lens. Then I'll put it in that place. I can do another one actually right next to it. Now, purists are going to say, well, hang on a second, you can't be doing that. Well, I can, I just did, so there you go. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy a lens from here and slot it right in there. That looks so much better. Okay, let's see. I saw something horrible over here. I think I'm just going to clone stamp that from the black background. You know all of these tools, I'm sure. There's nothing here that's too unusual. I'm going to go back to the keyboard shortcut is J, by the way, to get back to the healing brush tool. There we go. I'm going to get rid of these blobs of. We're going to deal with this artifact that's left over in just a minute. We're also going to deal with these blown out highlights. But let me first get rid of some of these worm trails. Hate the things. This is where my extreme OCD kicks into full speed, because I will be getting rid of blobs on this for the next couple of hours. I guess I can stop. You know what it is I'm saying here. So let me show you how I would deal with some of this artifact. Well, hang on, let me get rid of that spot. There we go. The way I deal with this artifact, there's not too much you can do about it. It is chromatic aberration, but it's layers upon layers of it. So it's not something that you'll be able to fix. Well, I'll tell you what. Let me show you. Let's go to Filter, Camera Raw, and let's go to Lens Corrections, and let's see if we can manually remove some of this chromatic aberration here. The purple stuff, well, that did knock down quite a bit of it, didn't it? The green is harder to get rid of. Let's see if that works. Well, it helped. No doubt about it, it helped. It helped to fade it, but there's still a tremendous amount of work to do. This is an unusually difficult photograph because of all of the fine detail. But to get rid of this, I would just hit S to go to the clone stamp tool, hit Alt or Option to select what I want to use as my source, and basically just paint in healthy looking background over the aberration that's left there. You're never going to get rid of all of it, but with patience and plenty of time, you can do a pretty good job. I'm using a soft brush, by the way, so that the effect is feathered onto the bristles rather than a sharp cutoff. And that is all there is to it. You can do this till the cows come home. You know you can't go any further when you get to a brush size of 1 pixel. Okay, now that is just something you keep doing, and every now and again zoom out and take a look at it, and you'll see it gets better and better. It's just incremental. It's a lot of work, but it's okay. That's what it takes. Now, I'm probably going to get rid of this. I think this is a stump of a leg. I'll remove that, and I'll be removing the pin as well. But I may do that by moving this onto a separate layer. Let me think about that for a minute. Let me show you how I do a little bit of dodging and burning to try to correct some of these blown highlights. What I'll do is I will create a new adjustment layer, and I'll go to curves, and I'll take my curve and I'll pull the exposure down until it's starting to look exactly the way I want it in most of the image, and then I'll bump it down a tiny bit more, and you'll see why. Then I'll hit Command I, which will switch that mask to a black mask, so none of that darkening effect is showing through. Then I'll hit another adjustment layer, another curves one, only this time I'll drag the brightness up. I don't think I'm going to need much of this. Also hit Command I to invert the mask so that none of that is getting through. Now, if you want, you can rename this burn, and you can rename the other one dodge, because that's basically what they are. Now, if you click on the burn mask and grab a brush, B for brush, with white as your foreground color, and the opacity down at maybe 5-6%. Now what I can use this brush for is to very, very slightly darken areas that are too bright. And this is much better to layer it in very gradually than it is to set the density up to 80 and just paint black all over it. This is a very subtle layering. It makes a big difference, though. It'll make a lot of difference out here. It can also help get rid of some of that glow, that chromatic aberration glow. And I'd do the same down here to see if there's any of this I could salvage. This is the way I dodge and burn any photographs in Photoshop. I don't use the dodge and burn tool, though this is basically what the dodge and burn tool are doing. I just prefer to be able to control the opacity and the flow and everything at my fingertips. And if you look, I don't know if you can see it, but if you look at the mask, you can see where I've painted white on in places. And if we turn it off, especially there under his beak, nose, whatever that thing's sticking out from his eyes, just ever so subtly knocking back those bright areas. So I'll keep doing this for a while. I'm really not sure if there's anywhere in here that I would want to to dodge. I mean, I like I like the mid-tones and the highlights. That all looks pretty good. So in the interest of time, I will come back and clean this thing up. But that is almost the end of my workflow. When I'm completely finished removing bits and pieces and ready to go back to Lightroom, the final thing that I will do is flatten the image by right-clicking and then flatten image. I'm not going to do it now because I'm not finished. And then I would save the image. And when I saved it, it would go straight back to Lightroom where it came from. And as long and complicated as that seems, that is exactly how I edit all of my focus stacked images. That is my go-to workflow. I'll clean this thing up and show you the end result. So this is what the crane fly looked like when I got through with my editing, and I must say that I haven't seen a more incredible compound eye than in this photograph in quite a long time. All right, I have no idea what I'm doing next. I've got so many things cooking. I just haven't decided what to prioritize next. I will keep you updated on what's going on with the live chat thing as soon as I do the rest of my research and homework. If you want to be on my mailing list, which is basically only for informational purposes, sending out information about what's coming up and that type of thing, I have a newsletter, and you can sign up for that at alanwallsphotography.com. And if you sign up for that, then every time I send out an email, which is rarely, unless I have something important to say, it's never. But if you sign up for that, then I can give you all the details about things like this chat thing. So just go over to alanwallsphotography.com and check the newsletter box. Oh, and by the way, if anybody is interested in my roast pork and praying mantis recipe, let me know. I'll send it to you. All right, I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.